Hello and welcome to Granny Mo's Bookshelf. This week I will be featuring Edward Ardrizonne as one author. First we'll do Paul the Hero of the Fire, and the second book we will be doing is Peter the Wanderer, and the third one will be Sarah and Simon and No Red Paint. I'm going to start with Paul the Hero of the Fire. Paul the Hero of the Fire by Edward Ardrizonne. Henry Z. Walk, Inc., New York. Copyright 1962. A new version of an old story for my grandson, Dominic. Once upon a time there lived a small boy. There was a small boy called Paul, and he lived with his mother and father in a pretty house in a large garden. He had a dog called Fido, a cat called Blackie, and as it was holiday time, he should have been happy, but instead of being happy, he was bored and worried. He was bored because he was tired of playing by himself, and worried because his mother seemed so sad and cross. One day, Paul was sitting as quiet as a mouse, trying to read a book. He heard his father say to his mother, "Darling, it's no use. We can't go on as before. The market has gone to pieces. We hardly have any money left. I'm afraid we must sell the house." Then he heard his mother sobbing and sobbing. This made Paul feel sad. He loved the house, and he hated the idea of having to leave it and going to some smaller place. "Oh, Blackie and Fido, what shall we do?" said Paul. "We must make some money, or we shall have to go away." But Blackie only meowed, and Fido only wagged his tail, which did not help very much. Then Paul went out and met his friends, Alf the coalman and Tom the butcher's boy, and asked them for advice. They both said, "You must get a job." On the way home, Paul had a wonderful idea. He would get a job at the fair. Next morning, he got up early while his parents were still asleep. He dressed himself quickly, put on a small suitcase, and put into a small suitcase a shirt, 2 vests, 1 pair of pajamas, 2 pairs of socks, 1 spare pair of shoes, face cloth, soap, toothbrush, and toothpaste. Then he wrote a letter to his mother and father and said goodbye to Blackie and Fido. "Darling Mummy and Daddy, I have gone to get a job and make some money, so please don't sell the house. Loving kisses from Paul." By hard walking, Paul soon arrived at the fair. "Your money to come in," said the man at the gate. "Please, sir," said Paul, "I have come to get a job. Must I pay?" "Oh, that's a nice story, that is. Trying to get in for nothing. Are you, young rascal? You pay your money or you stay outside." So poor Paul had to give him all the money that he had. Higginson's Giant Circus and Fair. It was still very early, and the fair was nearly empty, which made Paul feel small and lonely. The first person he saw was a rough-looking man at a coconut shy. "Please, sir," said Paul, "I want a job. Can you give me one?" "A job," said the man in a loud voice. "A little snippet like you? Why, dang my eyes. You are so small and pink I could eat you. Ha, ha, ha." And he roared with laughter. "Oh, dear, this will never do," thought Paul. As he hurried away, he tried not to cry, but he could not help one large tear which trickled down the side of his nose. And then he saw an enormous woman. She was so big that she was frightening. However, Paul plucked up enough courage to speak to her. "Why, dash my wig," said the fat woman. "A little boy like you want a job? Go home to your mother like a good boy." At this, Paul really began to cry, and between his sobs he told her the whole sad story. The fat woman was sorry for him and took him to see the manager of the fair. "Humph," said the manager, "you're a bit small, aren't you? I want a boy to turn the children's merry-go-round, but I don't think you're nearly strong enough." "I know I'm small, but I am very strong," said Paul, bending his arms to show his muscles. "All right," the manager said. "I will give you a trial." "Hey, Mike," he called, and the boy ran up. "Here's a new boy to help you. Take him away and make him work." Mike was a tall, thin boy. He seemed very cross. "I'm tired of death of turning that horrid merry-go-round," he said. "Now you have come, and you must turn it all day while I have a nice easy rest and collect the money. Hurry up and get started. Here come the children." Paul turned and turned the merry-go-round until his arms ached, and he felt so tired he could hardly stand, but he refused to give in, and he went on turning and turning. At the end of the day, Mike said to Paul, "I say, you do look tired, but you are a sport, aren't you? You haven't complained a bit." "Well, it's time to stop now, so come along with me. I will get you some food and show you where to sleep. Tomorrow I will share turning with you, and you can collect the money, but be sure to give the right change." Mike took Paul to a large tent in which were stabled a number of beautiful little ponies. He showed Paul where he slept on the heap of straw in the corner, and he told Paul that there was room for him there too. He gave Paul a blanket. Then he got 2 large mugs of cocoa and 2 hunks of bread, and Paul felt much better after his supper, but very sleepy. He put on his pajamas and went to bed. Mike was surprised when he saw the pajamas. "I say, you are tough," he said. "I always sleep in my clothes." Paul found a straw bed, and the straw bed was very warm and comfortable, and he was soon fast asleep. Mike and Paul became fast friends. Every morning he got up early and washed in buckets of cold water. During the day, they turned the merry-go-round or collected the money, and in the evening they lay on the straw drinking their cocoa and talking or listening to the quiet munching of the ponies. Mike had been in the fair all of his life, and he had many adventures to tell Paul. On Sunday, the fair was shut, and Mike and Paul had the day off. Paul wrote a letter to his mother and father saying that he had a job and he would soon be sending them money soon. Mike brushed his hair and polished his boots. Then they both went off to church looking very tidy. After church, they had a grand dinner with all the other people at the fair. There were lots of good things to eat. The table was laid with a white cloth set out between the tents. The manager sat at one end, while the fat lady sat at the other end. Paul sat between the lion tamer and the dwarf. The 2 clowns would insist on doing tricks which made everybody laugh. Now the lion tamer looked ferocious, but he was really a very mild man who was fond of animals and children. He introduced Paul to the animals, and after that, Paul, on his days off, would help him feed and clean out the cages. Paul would often go into the cages and play with the animals. Although they roared horribly, it was only to trick and thrill the people who came to see them. They were like their master, very mild. A really ferocious person was the lion tamer's wife. The lion tamer was afraid of her, and so were the animals. She used to poke them with her umbrella and said, "Out of my way, you horrid things." The dwarf was very small and very ugly and very vain, and on Sundays he dressed up in the height of fashion and wore high-heeled shoes to make himself look taller. He hated boys because they teased him, but when he found that Paul never teased him, he was always polite. He made him his best friend, and he would spend hours teaching him all sorts of tricks, circus tricks, such as standing on his head or jumping through hoops. One day, Paul was collecting the fares when he heard a boy say to another boy that he had never paid money to come into the fair, that he had found a hole in the fence behind the swings and came in that way without having to pay. Paul was shocked, but he remembered that the boy had said that it was lucky that he remembered what the boy had said, and it was lucky he did, for on the very next day, while they were collecting money, he heard a terrible cry of fire, fire, and saw clouds of smoke and hundreds of people running to the gates in a great panic. Mike and the children were terrified and started to run away too, but Paul remembered what he had been told, that is, never to panic if there's a fire, but keep your head and be brave. Stop, Mike, stop, children, he shouted. Don't run to the gates. You will be squashed in the crowd. Oops, I think I missed a piece. If you do, you will be squashed in the crowd trying to get out, and you may even be hurt or killed. I know another way out of the fair. Stay with me and I will lead you to safety. Paul shouted so loudly that Mike and the frightened children came back, and then he formed them up in a long column, 2 by 2, and at the end, Mike was at the end to see none of the frightened children tried to run away. Putting himself at the head of the column, Paul shouted, "Forward!" and he marched them through the burning fair. However, they had not gone very far when Mike remembered the ponies. "Paul," he shouted, "the poor ponies, they will be burnt." "Yes," shouted Paul back. "We must save them. Quick, children, after me." And they dashed to the pony tent and loosed the ponies. But they no sooner had done this when they heard the roars of the lions and the tigers and realized that they would have to save them too. So Paul was in charge, and he rushed to the cages and let the frightened animals out. Now a curious thing happened. Though the fire was getting fiercer and the flames roared horribly, Mike, who was terrified of fire, was so busy helping to loose the animals and look after the children that he quite forgot about to be frightened himself. In fact, he was nearly as brave as Paul. By this time, the fire was terrible, and the smoke was so thick that they coughed, and their eyes smarted so much that they could hardly see. Even Paul could not help feeling frightened. He wondered if he had done the right thing. Would he be able to save the children? However, at last, coughing and choking, they reached the fence and found the hole in it and crept out to safety just in time. There was a great crowd of people outside the fair, and when they saw the children, they gave a tremendous shout. The children are saved," they cried. You can just imagine how their mothers and fathers of the children hugged and kissed them. They thought they would have been burnt up in the fire. Paul's mother and father were there too, of course. Whoops, I missed a page. Oops. No. No, I didn't miss a page. That doesn't make sense. Paul's mother and father were there too, and of course gave him a great big hug. Poor Mike, he had no mother and father, and he felt very out of it, but they all gave him a hug and invited him to come back to the house and stay with them. The next morning, Paul was surprised to find printed in the paper a story about how he'd saved the children. It made him feel proud. "Boy hero saves children" in the Morning Advertiser. Higginson's fair destroyed. Enormous damage. Firemen overcome by fumes. Animals escape. A little later, there was a knock on the door, and in came the manager, the fat woman, the lion tamer, and the dwarf. The manager gave Paul a large sum of money and thanked him for saving the animals. They had all jumped over the fence to safety. The fat woman kissed him, and the lion tamer shook him by the hand, and the dwarf gave him a big bunch of flowers, which made Paul blush a lot. Paul told them how brave Mike had been, so they all shook Mike by the hand, and the manager promised to pay him much more money when he came back. Before they left, they all gave Paul and Mike 3 chairs, and the lion tamer said, brave fellows, with a tear in his eye. This made Paul very happy, but he was happier still when his father told him that With the help of the money, Paul had won. And the market there was better now, so no need to sell the house. The end. That was Paul, the Hero of the Fire. Copyright 1962. Hope you enjoyed that. Be sure to click like, share, and subscribe. Love you all. Take care. I'll be back again with the other 2 books. Bye.